I don't know what happened there, but I don't know. It was interesting. Somehow I assume I must have put my Wi-Fi radio on my desktop here into monitor mode. All of a sudden I lost connection, and when I looked at my Wi-Fi connection, I saw that I was in monitor mode. It's a bit ironic because I have I love doing monitor mode captures, so it's something that I do a lot, but I don't think I did anything to intentionally put it in monitor mode, and so yeah, I don't know exactly where that came from, why I got monitor mode happening, but yeah, my apologies for that. There we go. Yeah, apologies for that. Let me post a quick note on Twitter here, just in case there are folks who are wondering what the heck happened. Yeah, sorry about that. Okay, let's see here. I'm back now. Okay, sorry. Yeah, I don't know what I did. I mean, I honestly kind of chuckled a little bit when I realized that I did it. I lose connection. I'm like, what the heck is going on here? And then I look at it and I see that the what do you call it? I see that my Wi-Fi radio is in monitor mode. I'm connected via Wi-Fi right now while I'm doing this. That's just how my desktop is connected, and so yeah, so it if you're in monitor mode, you have no network connectivity. So by putting myself in monitor mode, it made it so I couldn't do anything. Let's see here. Let's get back to. All right. There we go. So yeah. So where I left off, we're talking about why is it that ghost frames exist, and so number one is we can capture the MPDU, we cannot capture the physical layer header. So let's suss out those technical terms and try to understand kind of what they mean. So we're going to talk about the frame format. And again, I assume that most of us have some type of networking background, but just in case, kind of the way this stuff works is you have your application data. The application data, in this case, being the video, the audio of this Twitch stream. So I have this Twitch stream, a packet of data, a piece of data, if you will, of this Twitch stream. That application data then gets a little TCP or UDP header added to it. That little application data so now it has the TCP or the UDP header added to it. It's going to get its IP header added to it as well. And then the application data, or what I should say is, once all of this is done, once we have the IP header, the TCP header, the UDP header, etc., that in Wi-Fi is what we call the MSDU. The M standing for MAC layer. The MAC layer is a sub-layer of layer 2 of the OSI model. The layer 2, also called the network layer, or sorry, not the network layer, the data link layer. Sorry. And then the SDU part, essentially just meaning data without any kind of encapsulation. So what I mean by that is, there's not been any kind of encapsulation. There's not been any kind of header or frame check or anything like that added from the MAC layer yet. At the MAC layer, this is just data coming from the IP layer, from layer 3. So that's the MSDU. Once we have the MSDU, so again, the MSDU includes all of this stuff. It includes the application data, the TCP header, UDP header, the IP header. Once we have that MSDU and we add a MAC layer header, in the case of Wi-Fi, this is going to be our 802.11 header. Once we add the MAC layer header, then that becomes the MPDU. And that's the thing that we can capture. That's also the thing that uses variable rates. So if you look up stuff, or if you know stuff about Wi-Fi data rates, there's all sorts of different Wi-Fi data rates. They're largely based on signal to noise ratio. If you have a stronger signal with less interference, meaning less noise, then your client device and your access point are capable of communicating at a higher data rate. The benefit of the higher data rate is each little packet of data, each little MPDU takes less channel time. By taking less channel time, other packets, either from the same client or to and from other clients, other packets can make use of the channel. If you have one MPDU and it has a low rate, that one MPDU is going to take up lots of channel time, and then you don't have as much other channel time available for other client devices, other packets of data, etc. So we want high data rates, and we do get variable data rates in the MPDU. So that's the part that we can capture. Now, the issue here is we have encapsulation in Wi-Fi at the physical layer. The physical layer would be, layer 1, also called the physical layer. What we get in Wi-Fi is we have the MPDU. So again, the MPDU includes the MAC layer header plus the application data plus TCP or UDP header plus the IP header. So all of that stuff together is the MPDU. But then we also add on a physical layer header, technically called a PLCP header. Physical layer convergence protocol is what PLCP stands for. So this PLCP header gets added on, and with the PLCP header getting added on, that's what makes up the PPDU. Okay. The PPDU is the physical layer header. The MPDU is also the PSDU. Again, SDU being data without encapsulation, and this is just at the physical layer. The PSDU is the same thing as the MPDU. In any case, so this is kind of the whole PPDU. This is everything that gets sent across wirelessly, but the key thing is, again, the MPDU uses a variable rate. The PPDU is not capturable. We do not have the ability to see all the little bits and bytes of the physical layer header. And the PPDU is always 6 megabits per second. Always 6 megabits per second. So it's not capturable, and it is always 6 megabits per second. And so, gotcha. So it's no longer the PLCP. Thanks, German. So yeah, so getting back to what we're talking about here, we can capture this MPDU. We can capture whatever at the variable rate, but we do not have the ability to see the little... there we go. Looks like I'm back. Sorry, had a little issue there. You know, it's strange. After updating to this newer version of my application that's used to do the streaming, this OBS application, I am definitely noticing noticing that today's is less stable. I don't know if one thing has anything to do with the other. Maybe the new version is just as stable as the other one, but that is now, the second conk out. I guess the first one was due to me somehow turning on monitor mode, but yeah, that was odd there. So getting back to what I was mentioning here, we can capture the MPDU, but we cannot capture the physical layer header. Okay. So that's fine. We can capture the MPDU. We can't capture the physical layer header. But then a second thing that goes on top of that is the fact that low rates can be heard further away because lower rates don't require as high of an SNR for demodulation. So if I were to diagram that out here, I have my access point. My access point is going to send something to my little client device here. My access point is going to send this PPDU. This PPDU is broken up between the physical layer header and the MSDU, or if you want to call it MPDU or PSDU. And this part is going at a variable rate. This physical layer header is going at 6 megabits per second. And what I'll do to kind of differentiate them is I'll use different colors. Let's use the color red for the physical layer header for the 6 megabits per second. What's going to essentially happen here is the blue part, the MSDU, the MPDU, the variable rate part, that part is going to have a certain range from the access point. But then the physical layer header is going to have a further range. The physical layer header, which is always 6 megabits per second, is going to have a further range because its rate is lower. Now, of course, if the rate that's being used by the MPDU is 6 megabits per second, then there won't be this discrepancy. There won't be this discrepancy between kind of the range of the physical layer header and the range of the MPDU, of the main part of the frame, the MAC layer header and the data and the IP header, etc. So you won't have this discrepancy if the two rates are the same, if the MPDU is at 6 and the physical layer header is also at 6. But that's rare. Most of the time, data rates are much higher. I'll show you an example here. So here's a capture showing my client device from yesterday. Let me see if I can find it. Oops, I don't have my filter set up right now. Can quickly get that set up though. Okay, I'm going to share this with you all here. And yes, I know I need to get better organized when it comes to the old stream so that I don't have to spend time bringing stuff up. So there we go. This is, let me get this so that it is an appropriate size. There we go. Okay. Maybe can go a little bit bigger there. And let's add in a little filter, a little tip for those of you that are Wireshark users. If you do an and wlan.fc.type_subtype equals 0x28. You can see all of the QoS data. You can see all of the data traffic. And notice for a lot of this traffic, we're not really able to see what the data rate was, but I think we'll be able to get it for some of it. Or at least I was hoping we would. I guess none of it has the data rate. That's a little bit odd. I thought I had at least a few that were showing the data rate here. Maybe not. Let's just do ADDR. So right now I'm doing only what the device was receiving. Let's do everything the device was transmitting and receiving. And I don't see it. Am I just... Maybe I'm using the wrong column. That might be it. Yeah, sorry about that. I'm not seeing the rate here coming through. So this is not the device that I was doing the capture with. So that might be the issue here. But yeah, for whatever reason, I'm just not seeing any of the data rate coming through here. The data rate that I was seeing yesterday was typically in the neighborhood of 300 megabits per second. Obviously, you'd kind of have to take my word for it there since I'm not seeing the data rate. Maybe I'm just completely missing that. Let's see here. Yeah, so I'm not seeing the data rate, but what I was hoping to show you all was that, and I guess I can just order things by data rate and see if that causes anything to show up. Yeah, so it looks like I don't have any of the data rates here. I think that's the correct MAC address, but I'm definitely seeing a little bit different info than I was seeing earlier on. So the point there is that what I'm seeing here, the communication that's happening here. Let me put myself above that. What I'm seeing there is a bunch of variable rate traffic. Unfortunately, I'm not able to see the actual data rates. I'm not sure exactly what I did there to make it so that I'm not currently able to see the data rates going across. And unfortunately, I can't do a new capture because I'm using I'm using my Wi-Fi radio right now, so I don't want to put it in monitor mode. But I'm seeing variable rate information there. The information that is in the physical layer header, that information, is going to be shown it's going to be shown in some of the sort of earlier parts of this frame. The fact that the frame is 224 bytes, for example, that's something that would come from the physical layer header. The data rate would come from the physical layer header as well. The channel and the channel width that's going to be used would come from the physical layer header as well. But notice when I select those things, none of the bytes of the frame get selected. When I select fields from the MPDU, say this duration field, this is part of the MAC layer header, notice how I now get this little blue highlight here. So when I click on that, that's the actual information being captured. Everything in this physical layer header, this part that's listed, 802.11 QoS data, that's the physical layer header. Everything in the MSDU, you can see there, I click on the MSDU, that's all the data. So this is the part that's actually captured. The physical layer header is a summary. All this information that I'm getting here from radio information, radio tap header. Well, I guess for radio tap header, it's showing some information that it's got, but it is an interpretation. It's not the actual bits of the physical layer header. From this, from the frame part, it shows the whole part, the whole frame. But that, again, I'm not able to see the bits of the physical layer header here. And so getting back to the whole kind of ghost frame issue. So I have the ability to capture the actual bits of the MPDU, of the MAC layer header, and of the data of the MSDU. I do not have the ability to capture the actual bits of the physical layer header. The bits of the physical layer header can be heard from further away because those bits are going to be 6 megabits per second always, while the MPDU is going to be a variable rate. Variable rates, if we go up to, let's say, Wi-Fi 5, Wi-Fi 5 is 802.11 AC. Variable rates can be anywhere from 6.5 megabits per second to, what was it? I believe it is, there's no devices that go above 1.73 gigabits per second. The standard says you can go up to 6.9 gigabits per second, but that includes multi-user MIMO and such. If I'm remembering correctly, as far as individual devices go, nothing's going to go above that 6.9 megabits per second, 6.9 gigabits per second. So again, Phi at 6 megabits per second, MPDU at 6.5 megabits per second to 1.73 gigabits per second. So the data for the physical layer header can be heard from much further away, and a key part about it is the physical layer header contains a field called the length field, and the length field indicates how much time is needed for this MSDU. And access points and clients will stay quiet for the time that the MSDU needs to go across the wireless channel. So if I to whip up another kind of quick drawing here, I have my little access point. The access point that I was connected to at the restaurant was on channel number 52. Let's say my laptop that I was using at the connect to this access point, my laptop was within the approximate range for 300 megabits per second. Again, my apologies. We couldn't actually see the rates. I'm not exactly sure what happened there, but on my laptop, I was able to see the rates when I was looking at it yesterday. I've got to check the Wireshark version that I have here on my desktop. So there's this range for 300 megabits per second where my laptop was clearly able to communicate with the access point because I saw the 300 megabit per second rate. But there's this whole other range somewhere beyond that, at a greater distance, where I'm able to see data at 6 megabits per second. And in this area, the Phi layer header, the physical layer header, sorry about that. Made a little mistake in Twitch again. Always forget to do that. So yeah, again, just to kind of give the little background here, Phi header always at 6 megabits per second. MPDU, that meaning the data plus the MAC layer header, is at a variable rate. It's going to be a rate somewhere between 6.5 megabits per second to 1.73 gigabits per second. That's at least what we have today. If we're using 802.11 AC, and if there's MIMO, it could go above that. The AC standard actually goes up to 6.9 gigabits per second. But at least what we're going to see today is going to be somewhere between 6.5 megabits per second and 1.73 gigabits per second. And these low rates can be heard from further away than high rates because low rates require a lower signal to noise ratio. And the issue with that is this physical layer header that's always at 6 megabits per second contains a length field. The length field indicates how much time is needed for the MSDU, for this variable rate part of things. And then all clients and access points are going to stay quiet for this MSDU. And actually, it would be the MPDU. It would be the header included along with the data. And so if I'm going to diagram that out, I'm here at the restaurant yesterday. There's an access point on channel number 52. I have my laptop here. My laptop was within range to do somewhere around a 300 megabit per second data rate. That was the data rate that I was seeing in Wireshark. Obviously, I know it wasn't showing up when I was showing you the Wireshark capture, so I must have messed something up, but that's what I was seeing live yesterday was 300 megabits per second, give or take. Some frames above 300, some below 300, but somewhere around 300 megabits per second. So clearly there's kind of a range here of some type of 300 megabits per second, and my laptop happened to be within range. That's supposed to be a laptop. Doesn't look like a great laptop drawing, but hopefully that's a little bit better there. But then there's another range of 6 megabits per second, and that's the range where the physical layer header for my 300 megabit per second data can be heard. And anything that's out here within this 6 megabit per second range, if it hears the physical layer header, the device is going to look inside the length field of the physical layer header, and the device is then going to stay quiet. At least typically there is some nuance there. There may be scenarios where client device or an access point doesn't stay quiet, but typical behavior is going to be to stay quiet after hearing that little length field. And so devices that are beyond this 300 megabit per second range, if there are other laptops, if there are smartphones, whatever there are, if there are devices beyond this range, those devices could be kept quiet due to this traffic that's being sent from the access point to my laptop as I'm sitting there in that restaurant. But even though those devices are being kept quiet, we do not have the ability to see that data. We do not have the ability to capture those frames. Those frames are going to be outside of this 300 megabit per second range, so we're not going to be able to fully capture those frames. And I think, German, that duration value is for the MAC layer duration, or am I misremembering? I thought, or maybe the, oh, gotcha. I see what you're showing. You're showing the duration value for the MAC and the length value for the physical layer header. So that's what German is showing there. The duration value there would be for the MAC layer duration there. I'll quickly bring up the Wireshark capture again for those who may be interested in kind of the nitty-gritty aspects of this. So there's my Wireshark capture, and kind of hopefully you can see that here, that inside the MAC layer header, so this is part of the variable rate header, there's this duration field that says 48 microseconds. And so German is saying that in the standard, that duration value is going to be the length value. The length value of the header is going to sort of affect that duration value. Duration of the MPDU plus the physical layer header. Yeah, that's what the length. The length value is going to be just the MPDU, if I'm remembering it correctly. Maybe I'm misremembering that. That's possible that I'm misremembering that. It wouldn't make that much sense to me for the MPDU length value to include the physical layer header, just because the length value is in the physical layer header. But gotcha. I see what he's saying. It's including the HT or VHT or HE physical layer header. I guess I should, I don't want to get too far deep down the rabbit hole there, but just to clarify kind of what we are talking about here. So we have our MPDU, This MPDU is going to be going at a variable rate. Let's say in my example, it was 300 megabits per second. The MPDU is going to include the MAC layer header plus the IP layer header plus whatever data plus the TCP header, UDP header, etc., right? Then there is what I'm calling just the physical layer header. I'm probably simplifying it a little bit. And what I'm saying is the physical layer header goes at a standard rate. But in reality, if you're using Wi-Fi 4 or Wi-Fi 5 or Wi-Fi 6, this physical layer header is kind of split up into an old OFDM physical layer header that goes at 6 megabits per second, and then the new OFDM, which is Wi-Fi 4, 5, and 6. And so, yeah, that is correct. The length field is going to be part of the old OFDM part of the physical layer header. And so it is correct what German's saying there, that this length field is going to include whatever time it takes for HT, which is Wi-Fi 4, also known as 802.11n, VHT, which is also known as Wi-Fi 5, 802.11ac, or HE, which is also known as Wi-Fi 6 or 802.11ax, whatever amount of time it takes for the physical layer header of these things will be included in that length field. And then again, the MPDU, it's going to have its own duration field inside the MAC header. Those are different numbers, though. Those are the length field of the physical layer header and the duration field of the MAC header are two different numbers. So bottom line here is we have those two different ranges, and we have the possibility that there's going to be some devices that are beyond 300 megabits per second, but not beyond 6 megabits per second, that are going to be potentially subject to a ghost frame problem. They might hear the little length field that was sent at 6 megabits per second. They might essentially be told, hey, stay quiet for the Wi-Fi 4, 5, and 6 physical layer header, for the MAC header, for the IP header, for the TCP or UDP header, for the data. Stay quiet for all the rest of this stuff. But it's possible that we won't be able to see that. We won't be able to capture that, and thus might not be able to appropriately troubleshoot that. And so, you know, that might have been what was happening at the restaurant. You know, I don't know that to be the case. Darn it all, I made the same mistake I keep on making, forgetting to put the PowerPoint in front. Sorry about that, everybody. But yeah, so what I was saying there was we have the MPDU. This is the part that is going at a variable speed. In my case, it was about 300 megabits per second. This is the part that includes the IP header and the TCP or the UDP header and our data, our application data. And then the way I've been referring to it is just one monolith physical layer header, but in actuality, there's kind of an old OFDM physical layer header that's at 6 megabits per second. And then after that would be our HT or VHT or HE physical layer information. HT being the same thing as 802.11n, which is known as Wi-Fi 4. VHT is 802.11ac, known as Wi-Fi 5. HE, 802.11ax, known as Wi-Fi 6. So that information is also going to be accounted for in the length field. The length field is part of this old OFDM part that is always at 6 megabits per second. So the length field will include how much time it takes for whatever physical layer encapsulation is added for Wi-Fi 4, 5, or 6, or some combination of them, and the MPDU, you know, IP header, TCP or UDP header, and data. All of those things would be included in the length field. And so the bottom line is, I have my access point here. my access point has a certain range where, let's say, it can hit 300 megabits per second, and another range where maybe it can hit somewhere in the neighborhood of 144 megabits per second, and another range where maybe it can hit 6 megabits per second. And so if my client device is in the restaurant like I was yesterday, and my client device is communicating at 300 megabits per second, if someone is within the range of 300 megabits per second, yes, then they can see, they can capture the traffic that is going between my client device and the access point. However, if someone is beyond 300, in the 144 range, in the 6 range, in all of these other locations, if someone's in any of those other locations, then they cannot see. They cannot capture what's going between my client device and my access point. But because of this length field in the physical layer header always being at 6 megabits per second, it's possible that this here data, this 300 megabits per second data, could affect the channel in these areas. In these areas, these devices could hear the physical layer header, listen to the length field, stay quiet for all of these parts of the length field, and we wouldn't have any ability to see that, any ability to kind of troubleshoot that. And so that definitely can be a problem in Wi-Fi. Now, was it the problem at the restaurant I was at? There's some evidence to support that theory. I mentioned before, I'll bring it back up here. Whoops, sorry, I forgot I gotta bring it up again. Give me just a moment here. Okay, now hopefully you can see that. So yeah, definitely some evidence to support this theory. I kind of talked about it before. We've got a relatively, what looks like a clean channel. We got a strong enough signal strength. We don't have too many client devices, but we're still seeing those relatively low speeds that we saw earlier on. Also, I'm going to kind of bring up the statistics here. This is what I saw when I looked at the Wireshark capture. Give me just a minute to show you those statistics. Hopefully that's kind of clear enough there, what you're seeing. Let me see if I can maybe make that text a little bit bigger. But the downlink retry percentage was definitely a little bit worse than the uplink retry percentage during the little throughput test that I ran. Even though the uplink was a lot slower, just in terms of the number of captured retransmissions, notice the percentage is a lot higher. Now, neither one of those percentages is probably at the level where you're going to have serious concerns. The downlink retry percentage, that's about 3%. The uplink retry percentage, that's about 1%. I'd say, 3%, 1% usually are both considered pretty good numbers for retry percentages, but it still is a pretty significant discrepancy between downlink and uplink, and that could be a sign that maybe when the wireless access point sends data to me, there's some type of interference that's happening, and maybe when my device sends data to the access point, there's not as much interference because my client device is susceptible to ghost frames, that potentially my client device is kind of backing off and not even trying to send because of the presence of ghost frames. That's a key thing to note about this whole ghost frame situation. Is the ghost frame situation is, if ghost frames are in fact a problem, is going to cause the device to not even try to send. It's not something where you see, I'm going to have lower data rates or I'm going to have higher retry percentages. When it comes, if there is an actual ghost frame problem, if I am experiencing a ghost frame problem, the way that problem manifests itself is going to be the client device or the access point not even trying to send. So it's not something, this is not like a retry issue. That's not what the issue is. This is not some type of data rate issue. That's not what the issue is. You're not necessarily going to see higher or lower data rates. You're not going to necessarily see more or fewer retries. If you do, in fact, have a ghost frame problem, the issue is just going to be that your client device or your access point internally is saying, I'm staying quiet for a while. I'm not even going to attempt to send because I heard this 6 megabit per second physical layer header. The 6 megabit per second physical layer header told me to stay quiet. And so now I'm not going to try to send data. So it's definitely a little bit of a tricky problem, right? Because I don't have the ability to look at a certain statistic and say, yes, that's got to be ghost frames. That, it shows that it's not ghost frames. You're kind of looking for the absence of something. You're looking for the absence of a client device trying to send. And so it makes it tricky. So in a lot of ways, what you want to try to do with it is trying to sort of deduce, could ghost frame issues be my problem? Ghost frames is kind of one of those things where when you've exhausted other possibilities, then you say, well, maybe ghost frames could be the problem. Here I just put together a list of kind of some other things that might cause performance problems in Wi-Fi. For example, CCI. CCI is co-channel interference. What we essentially mean by that is more than one access point operating on the same channel. Now, we didn't see that. We didn't see co-channel interference. We only saw the one access point operating on channel 52. But I also didn't show you neighboring networks. So this restaurant that I was at, it's in the city of Los Angeles, where I live. It is in a densely populated enough area where the issue could have been other devices on the same channel, causing co-channel interference. With the CCI thing, though, it's a little bit tricky because of the nature of ghost frames. We must use 6 megabit per second beacons. What commonly nowadays is called the 6 megabit per second minimum basic rate, or MBR. We must use the 6 megabits per second beacons, or MBR, to accurately gauge CCI. Okay. We don't have the ability to accurately identify whether CCI could be an issue if we're not using the 6 megabits per second rate. And the reason for that is because of the ghost frame issue. If I have two access points that are both here on channel number 52, and my access points are, let's say, using the 18 megabits per second MBR, the 18 megabit per second minimum basic rate, 18 megabit per second beacons, the possibility exists that the 18 megabit per second range of these two access points will not cause serious overlap. And so when I look at my Wi-Fi scanner, I don't end up seeing two access points both operating on channel 52 in the same location. But due to ghost frames, what could be happening is these two access points do reach each other at the 6 megabit per second rate and cause CCI. Both access points are kind of overlapping with the other with the 6 megabit per second rate and thus causing CCI. Gosh, when I was working at USC, this was a humongous problem. It's like we would go into a building, let's say where there were professors' offices or classrooms or whatever it was, and there would be some type of Wi-Fi issue reported, or in some cases we were trying to be a little bit proactive to go into the building, and we would walk around with whatever tool we were using. I like to use Wi-Fi Explorer Pro. Some of the other folks on the wireless team were more so fans of Ekahau. But you use whatever tool it is you're using to try to get a gauge of CCI, and you end up seeing the number of access points that are located in a given area seems to be low enough. I'm seeing we're using 20 megahertz wide channels. We have 24 channels available. I'm seeing 13 access points in my little list of access points. So that seems to be a low enough number. 13 access points. We have 24 channels available because we're using the 20 megahertz wide channel. Seems to be okay. But our standard at the time when I was at USC was a 12 megabit per second minimum basic rate. And so there were cases where we'd go into a building that had some classrooms or such. We'd run our scan or run our Ekahau survey. We'd see 8, 10, 12 access points all hitting one given area. And we say, okay, that's fine. We have 24 channels. There's only 8 or 10 or 12 access points. Should be more than enough channels for air match. We were using Aruba. Air matches, the protocol Aruba uses to avoid interference, to automatically set the channel of the access points. So we'd see, okay, we're using air match, 24 channels available. There's only 12 or fewer or a little bit more access points in this area. But then we would change the minimum basic rate to 6 megabits per second, and all of a sudden we'd see 27 access points all hitting one area. Just because of what I'm talking about here, just because of this gap, where the gap between kind of what I can see with this 18 rate and what is actually being interfered with this 6 megabits per second rate, there were so many extra access points that were where our location was kind of inside that gap of those access points that, we had a CCI problem, but we didn't realize we had a CCI problem because of ghost frames, because of the fact that we couldn't see these beacon frames that were going above 6 megabits per second. You can kind of see that a little bit here. Let me bring back my little scan. So yeah, you can kind of see that little scan there. And sorry, I got distracted by something. But yeah, you can kind of see it in the little scan here. Notice the minimum basic rate is 18. The rates that are allowed on this access point start at 18 megabits per second. So 6 megabits per second, 9 megabits per second, 12 megabits per second, all of those data rates have been disabled. And again, I have my little access point here. There's going to be a certain range out to 18. There's going to be a different range out to 6. And so that whole area there between 18 and 6, that's an area where I'm not going to be able to see this access point. I'm not going to be able to capture this access point. And so, yeah, right now I see on this free Wi-Fi network, all there is channel 52, 56, 44, and 48. Because these are both 40 megahertz, so it's 2 channels each. 52, as I mentioned before, pairs with 56. 44 pairs with 48. So right now, at this restaurant, at the table I was sitting at yesterday, it's just 44, 48, 52, 56. Those are the only channels in use. Those are the only channels occupied. But if this restaurant had 6 megabits per second at its minimum basic rate, then we could see the real scope of CCI. Maybe there's, we only see 2 access points in the 5 gigahertz band, 802.11 AC, 5 gigahertz only. We only see 2 access points in the 5 gigahertz band. Maybe there's 10. Maybe there's a bunch of other access points that are hitting the table where I was sitting, but I'm not able to see that in my scanning tool or in my site survey tool because of the nature of ghost frames. So CCI might have been happening there, and it might have been the reason why my client device was, it might have been happening at the access point. That might have been causing the access point to send less data. It might have been causing more retries when the access point did send data. What could have been happening here is there might have been other access points in the area that were on channel 52. On channel 52. And so when my little client device, is on channel 52 over here, I might not have been able to see these access points, but when my access point was sending data to my client device, there may have been little 6 megabit per second traffic or higher than 6 megabits per second traffic. Basically anything between 6 and 18 might have been hitting my client device and causing CCI. So that could have been an issue there. Made the same mistake I keep on making by forgetting to put the PowerPoint back up. So that could have been a reason. Maybe there was a CCI issue. Again, with a CCI issue, be aware of ghost frames. You want to make sure that you have that 6 megabits per second minimum basic rate, or that 6 megabits per second, what is sometimes called the beacon rate. That's the only way you're going to be able to accurately identify CCI. There might have been other issues. There might have been lower rates due to SNR that can cause performance issues. That wasn't really a problem with me. Remember, I said 300 megabits per second was the data rate that my client device was using. Given the fact that it's a 40 megahertz wide channel, and given the fact that my laptop supports 2-stream MIMO, the maximum data rate that my laptop would have been able to hit would have been, I believe it's 400. So 300 is not 400. I'd like to be able to hit 400 rather than 300 megabits per second, but still 300 is pretty high. I wouldn't call 300 a low rate, so I wouldn't say that this would have been the problem. We saw the retry percentages. I didn't see a tremendous, large amount of retries. So we did see the fact that the downlink was 3 times higher than the uplink. That's a little bit of a concern. I'd rather not see high percentages of higher retry percentages one way than the other. Like, I'd like to see uplink and downlink retry percentages very similar to one another, but not likely the problem here. Non-802.11 interference, that's something that you can only see in a spectrum analyzer. That is something that can cause a problem, but I wouldn't say it's particularly common, especially in areas like restaurants. You tend to see non-802.11 interference more so at industrial sites or in outdoor areas. That's something that you can see. Yeah, and German asks the question, well, if we're seeing ghost frames, then shouldn't the spectrum analyzer show us a high spectrum utilization? And the answer there is absolutely. The issue is that the signal is so low that it's hard to accurately determine if the spectrum analyzer is in a spectrum analyzer, what the difference would be between a utilization level where you have some type of ghost frame, a co-channel interference problem that's being hidden by ghost frames, or whether you don't have a co-channel interference problem that's being hidden by ghost frames. That's kind of the issue there. When it comes to the ghost frame, identifying ghost frames by using a spectrum analyzer, the signal strength is so low at 6 megabits per second, 12 megabits per second, 9 megabits, these numbers that you're sort of missing. The signal strength is so low that it's kind of hard to distinguish that from the noise when you're looking at a spectrum analyzer. I'll try to illustrate that with you. I think I have a screenshot that I can share with you all. Let me see if I thought I had a spectrum, I guess I'll just bring up a generic. There we go. This will work. So give me just a moment here. Sorry for the little delay. Just getting this screenshot of a spectrum analyzer so that you all can see it. Okay, whoops, I'm gonna have to definitely shrink that a little bit. Don't maybe need to shrink it that much. There we go, I think that'll work. Okay, so yeah, so the sort of issue that you run into, and maybe you can kind of see it here already, is just the signal strength that a 6 megabit per second or 9 or 12 megabit per second, so one of those lower rate frames is going to come in at. It's definitely going to be below -80. There's a decent chance it's going to be below -85 or even below -90. And so it's just very, very difficult to differentiate here. It's just very, very difficult to kind of differentiate and see, I have a lot of traffic. This was taken in a very, very clean environment. This was taken in an auditorium where it's a relatively large auditorium. The walls of the auditorium have been soundproofed and are relatively thick. You really don't hear, see Wi-Fi networks that are in the auditorium, access points that are in the auditorium from the outside. You don't see access points that are on the outside, inside the auditorium, when the doors are closed typically. And so this was kind of a relatively quiet environment, an environment where we definitely did not have a ghost frame problem. And so you can see it's relatively light here. If you have a heavy ghost frame problem, you'll probably see more of these little, whatever dots here, but they're only going to rise up a certain amount. They're not going to rise up that high above this kind of basic noise floor that you have. So it's just going to be, it's going to be a tough thing to see in a spectrum analyzer. Maybe it would be something that you'd be able to see in a spectrum analyzer, German. It probably something that warrants a little bit more of a look, more of an investigation to, next time I'm around an area where there might be a ghost frame problem, probably not a bad idea to break out the spectrum analyzer and see if there's that big difference. But that's just it's the difficult part is those, when you're at the limit of the 6 megabit per second, the 12, the 9, the 18 megabit per second range, those signal strengths that you're hearing that access point at are just so low that it sometimes is difficult to differentiate from the noise floor. So it might be a good tool. It might be something to look into. Maybe, if you're able to do testing or what have you, maybe you would be able to see, if you set up an environment where you definitely have a ghost frame problem and you've kind of tested it out, you've seen, well, my throughput numbers have gone down and, it doesn't show as a CCI problem. If I look in Ekahau or I look in Wi-Fi Explorer Pro or I look in, whatever scanning tool or surveying tool I'm using, I don't see a CCI problem. All the other stuff looks good. And I'm still seeing slower speeds than I should. If you kind of have that evidence of a ghost frame problem, maybe you do see that. Unfortunately, when I was at the restaurant, I didn't have my spectrum analyzer adapter plugged into my laptop. And so that's something that I should have done. I should have checked to see if what that looked like in the laptop. Getting back to other potential performance issues, you can have too many clients. We already saw there were only 3 clients connected there. Hidden node can be an issue. I haven't really gone into hidden node in too much detail here, but essentially what hidden node means is that you have a device that isn't able to keep everything quiet that it needs to keep quiet. It's like when my client device sends data to this access point, that little physical layer header that is 6 megabits per second, it's able to travel a long way to kind of keep devices quiet. All the way that header can reach, it's able to keep devices quiet. The issue is there may be some devices that, there may be some other AP or some other client device that's beyond the range of the 6 megabits per second physical layer header that have with its own Wi-Fi traffic can reach my AP and can kind of cause interference with the AP. And so, that's what we call the hidden node problem. That's what this is here, is the hidden node problem, where we have devices that can reach the receiver but cannot hear the transmitter. So if there's this client or this access point out here that can't hear the transmitter but can reach the receiver, then we get a hidden node problem. And look, that might have been a problem at this restaurant. I don't know. I didn't have access to a floor plan. I didn't walk around other areas to see if there were other access points. It does all have to be on the same channel. So this client or access point would have had to be on channel number 52 or channel number 56 to cause a hidden node problem. But I didn't have a chance to walk around and sort of really see if there was a hidden node problem. So, it could have been a hidden node problem that was an issue at this restaurant. Also, of course, network issues that was brought up earlier on in the class could have been due to putting bandwidth contracts, bandwidth limits, rate limits, whatever you want to call them. It could have been due to bandwidth contracts on the network. It could have just been due to other network issues. It could have been due to the routing configs. It could have been due to the path that data has to go through. It could have been due to just basic bandwidth limits, the limits that controllers or routers or whatever devices that your data is traveling through have, and that could be affecting your wireless users. So all of those things could be an issue, but if you've checked all these things and you're still having issues, consider that ghost frames could be an issue. And the biggest thing is consider that ghost frames could be hiding a CCI issue. That's kind of the main point of this is if I go back to that little scan, this is what I wanted to kind of close the show with, if you so to speak. If I go back to that little scan here, I have that 18 megabit per second minimum basic rate. And so that tells me that there may be CCI, but I may not be able to see that CCI because of the ghost frame issue. That there essentially may be ghost frames coming from this access point or from some other access point that are able to reach the AP that I was connected to or able to reach my client device, and might be essentially creating a CCI problem, but a CCI problem that I can't see. I don't have the ability to troubleshoot this, to locate that this CCI problem exists. And so that's kind of the big issue there. Brujo, which I thought was a male witch in Spanish. Maybe my Spanish is incorrect or too much slang or out of date, but I definitely like the name. Asking, does any tool capture... Oh, Bruce Johnson. Sorry, Bruce. Yeah, now... oh, man. Genius. I've actually met Bruce. Bruce, I'm sure, is very excited about the Boston Bruins victory yesterday. I watched a decent amount of that game. The Boston played against Las Vegas. Las Vegas is a rival of the LA Kings. LA Kings is the hockey team that I support. So I watched some of the Boston Bruins there. But yeah, does any tool capture deferred transmissions? Yeah, and so that's the tree. So I assume what you mean by deferred transmissions is like you're not actively capturing it right now, but you can kind of go back and look at what happened previously. Maybe I'm completely misunderstanding what you're saying there. And yeah, the answer I was going to give, Bruce, is that at least to my knowledge is only something that you're going to be able to find on the infrastructure side. I know that a big feature that Mist has is to be able to go back and look at captures, even if you weren't actively capturing them. Missed access points just naturally save a certain amount of data for a certain amount of time, a certain amount of frames for a certain amount of time, and so you can kind of go back 10 minutes later, an hour later, a couple hours later, whatever it is, and say, I need to see a capture from what was going on at this time period, and you can kind of see it that way. And then also, if you're just looking for kind of 802.11 statistics, a lot of vendors will give you that information from the perspective of the access point. So when I was working at USC, that was or that is, I believe at least, still a Aruba shop. And let's see, sorry, there we go. There, I can use it. The Aruba command that I would use a lot was show AP client table, or show AP debug, sorry. I haven't been in front of the thing in so long, my memory is failing me. Show AP debug client table, AP-name, and then whatever your AP's name is. And so if you do that, you're able to see some of this information. You're not able to get super in depth, but you're able to see the data rates that are being used. You're able to see how many packets of data were sent and received to each client device. So you can definitely get an idea. And that was kind of the first place that I would go if I thought there might be a ghost frame problem. The basic idea was, if I got word that someone was having a Wi-Fi issue, right? If it was like, oh, the Wi-Fi is slow in this restaurant on campus, the Wi-Fi is slow in this lecture hall, whatever it would be, I would look back at the statistics during the time that it was slow in Aruba's Airwave. Airwave is Aruba's main monitoring management software. And I would be able to see, okay, during, at 9 a.m. or whatever time the class was happening, 9 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. when the class was happening, we saw number of users per access point go as high as 100 or as high as 250 or whatever it was for all the access points in this lecture hall. And so, sometimes you would see, okay, there were just a lot of users. But if I would look back and I would see, there weren't that many users in the lecture hall. Either I've already been in that lecture hall to do a bit of a survey, or I'm able to look at the floor plan for that building, and I see that it doesn't really look like it would be likely that we have some type of, a problem where there's not enough APs or too many APs or whatever the case was. If I saw that wasn't an issue, if it was an area where we didn't have non-802.11 interference, either, because we were able to look at that by turning an access point into a spectrum analyzer, or if an on-site survey had been done with a spectrum analyzer, if we weren't seeing all of those things, if the Echo survey, if an Echo survey had been done for that area and didn't show any big co-channel interference, if we weren't seeing any of those things, but we were still getting complaints about the Wi-Fi, then usually it would go into either one of two directions. Either this might be a wired networking problem. So let's take a look at what the wired diagnostics are for the switch ports that those access points are connected to. Let's take a look at the wired configuration for the switch ports and which VRF those access points are on, and seeing if there's anything that could indicate an issue there. Or maybe this is a hidden CCI problem that is being hidden because of ghost frames. If I'm seeing the retry percentages are staying low, the data rates are staying high, but just the number of packets that the client devices are transmitting, or the access points are, the access points are receiving, or the clients are receiving, if the number of packets I'm seeing when I do this show AP debug command is a much lower number of packets than I would expect, I'm not seeing the retries, the data rates are high, but the number of packets is lower, then maybe what's happening is I have a ghost frame problem. Maybe what's happening is there's CCI and I'm not able to really see that CCI due to ghost frames, and those ghost frames are kind of keeping my clients quiet or keeping the access points quiet and just not allowing the network to carry as much data as I would like it to carry. So that's a place where I started. The other one, I think I mentioned this in earlier streams, I was a big fan of using the Nyansa Voyance product. I realized the news just broke yesterday that Nyansa is now part of VMware. So, when I was using the Nyansa product, it was, or Nyansa, I guess is how you pronounce it. It was an independent company. It was an independent organization. So with Nyansa being acquired by VMware, I don't know if the Voyance product is going to stay the same or what exactly is going to happen with it. Maybe it'll just be integrated into some type of VMware product or whatever. But the bottom line is, at least when I was using it, one of the things I liked about the Nyansa product is it essentially was just doing this show AP debug client table command over and over again in the background, taking those statistics, aggregating them, kind of almost taking metadata from them. So you weren't able to see the output of any individual show AP debug command, but what you were able to see is just overall information about, here's how many clients were on this access point. Here's what the retry percentage was overall for that access point. Here's how much data a specific client sent and received on that access point. Here was that client's retry percentage over time. It would be typically like a graphical look at that information. But you either doing the show AP debug command individually or looking at the statistics in Voyance, that's, if I saw that there was just less data going across the network than I thought there should have been, then that was a real indicator, like, maybe there's a ghost frame issue. Maybe we need to put in a change request to allow us to temporarily set the minimum basic rate in this lecture hall or in this restaurant to 6 megabits per second. Maybe we need to go over there, do a little on-site survey once the rate is set to 6 to see if there was co-channel interference that was sort of hidden by ghost frames, there's actually co-channel interference, but because of the ghost frame issue, we couldn't really see it before, and then kind of adjust from there. Now, the other thing I will mention, though, as we look at this, I have a feeling that in the end, the problem wasn't actually ghost frames, and I realize I've been talking for almost 2 hours about ghost frames, and now at the very end, I'm saying, well, it probably really wasn't all that. Look, the reality here, it looks like they have the transmit power on the access point set to 3 dBm, and it's just the transmit power on their access points is too low. The good news is having the transmit power on your access point set to this low number gives you the illusion of not having CCI, right? I don't see any CCI here. I only see 2 access points. Those 2 access points are on different channels. So, it gives me the illusion of not having CCI, but when you have a low transmit power, that is the type of thing that can lead to crowd failures, meaning a Wi-Fi network that tests well but doesn't work so well once real people show up. That's what I call a crowd failure, and that's probably what's happening here. Probably whoever it was that set up the Wi-Fi network at this restaurant set up a bunch of access points. They probably set all of their access points to a 3 decibel transmit power limit, to this really, really low 3 decibel transmit power limit. And, remember with Aruba, when you see 3 decibels, that's 3 decibels EIRP. And so I believe Aruba access points have a minimum transmit power, if I'm remembering correctly, of 0 dBm. So 3 decibels here probably means 0 dBm for the actual transmit power, since this is Aruba. To be honest with you, I'm not 100% sure. It's possible that even though you configure EIRP with Aruba, maybe this 3 decibels actually means 3 decibels transmit power. But I think this 3 decibels means EIRP, which then would make it so the actual transmit power is 0 dBm. And so what's happening is you have the access point set to whatever it is, 3 or 0 dBm EIRP. Your client devices can go up to 27 dBm. That's what TPC does. Transmit Power Control, or TPC, indicates the maximum transmit power that a client can do. And so that what we could be having here is crowd failures. That's sort of what could be occurring here. It's a little bit difficult to know that for sure, but that is my actual guess on what we have here. Is just the transmit power of the access point is set to such a low number that we're possibly getting a crowd failure. Let me try to describe the situation here. So here was the restaurant, here's kind of the table that I was sitting at. Here's my little laptop. Who knows how many access points they actually had in the restaurant. But let's imagine that, we have little APs in a number of different places. So let's say that we have access points in a number of different places, and because the transmit power level is so low, I'm getting negative 63 dBm, even though this access point is at a 0 dBm transmit power. And then I can see one other access point. That was the access point that was on channels 44 and 48. My access point obviously was on channel 52. But that might have been what I was seeing, and maybe all of these access points might be on 0 dBm. And so maybe that makes it so that this access point here, even though it's relatively close, whoops, sorry, I made the same mistake I've been making over and over and forgot to put up the PowerPoint. Sorry about that. Okay, so let me redraw the restaurant. So yeah, here's my big old restaurant. Here's the table that I'm at. Here's my little laptop on my table. Let's say there's an access point that was relatively close to me that I was connected to, and then I have other access points throughout this thing. Who knows how many. Could be access points also that might have been in other areas, whatever. Maybe outside they have access points for a patio area or whatnot. And at least what could be happening, I have the 0 dBm transmit power, and so I can hear that at negative 63 dBm. That's what you saw on my Wi-Fi scanner. Maybe there's another access point, 0 dBm transmit power. My laptop is hearing that. It's negative 69 dBm, as you saw, looking at that. But then maybe some of these other access points, even though they're relatively close, because of the fact that they're transmitting at 0 dBm, those access points are not heard at all. My laptop is not able to hear those access points. The issue then comes in, my access point here was on channel number 52 and 56. Maybe there's some other access point over here that's also on channel 52 and 56. Whoops, 56. And maybe there's some other client device, maybe someone else in the restaurant is using Wi-Fi as well. This little access point on channel 52 transmits at 0 dBm. Its radio waves come nowhere near where my access point does. No interference whatsoever between those radio waves because the transmit power on both access points is set to 0 dBm. But where the crowd failure aspect comes in is when my little client device, well, sorry, not mine, but someone else's client device transmits to the access point, that client device can go up to 27 dBm. And now those radio waves easily can reach my laptop and my access point. And when my access point, my laptop is transmitting to my access point. I have a Mac laptop. If I remember correctly, Mac laptops go up to 19 dBm. I might be a little bit off there, so I'll say approximately 19 dBm. Those radio waves may interfere with this neighboring guy and the access point that the neighboring guys connect to. That's what I mean by crowd failure. You don't see that in your testing, but then once people show up and they start connecting, these two access points that don't hit each other end up having client devices who hit each other. When the client device transmits data to the access point, they end up interfering with one another. And, so that could be what's happening. I don't know. It might be because the transmit power was so low. Maybe that's why my performance was so lackluster there. Maybe if they increase you may remember from an earlier stream, my recommendation is usually 12 to 17 dBm transmit power for Aruba. What that means is somewhere in the neighborhood of about 21 to 26 dBm EIRP. And so you that's not negative, sorry, that's just positive, 21 to 26 dBm EIRP. Aruba again does their configurations in EIRP rather than in transmit power. That's why I'm mentioning Aruba separately. But yeah, so if the transmit power is at those levels, then we would likely be able to see co-channel interference. Maybe when I did my little scan in Wi-Fi Explorer, maybe I'd be seeing 15 or 20 access points in the restaurant rather than only 2 access points in the 5 gigahertz band. Maybe I'd be seeing 15 or 20 access points, and then as the network engineer, if I were the network engineer of the restaurant, I could say, okay, I can see here in Wi-Fi Explorer or Ekahau or whatever surveying tool you use, I'm seeing in Wi-Fi Explorer that I have this big co-channel interference problem once I get my transmit power to a more appropriate level. So now I can disable some of my access points, or maybe I can let AirMatch or Cisco uses, what do they call it? RRM, Radio Resource Management. My Cisco RRM or my Aruba AirMatch then can kind of adjust these channels appropriately and make it so that, I'm not using channel 52 when it's closer. Or maybe I can outright disable some access point radios. Believe it or not, at one of the consulting jobs that I did for a big open office environment, we were disabling 5 gigahertz radios. There were a number of areas of this office where the numbers we ended up using were 12 and 15, or it was maybe either 12 and 15 or 11 and 14. So 2.4 gigahertz AP radios, I forget the exact number, but they were set to either 11 or 12 dBm transmit power. This was a Cisco environment, so we were using actual transmit power. The 5 gigahertz radios were either 14 or maybe 15 dBm transmit power. And once we set that up, when we would do scans, and again, the scanner tools I like to use are tools that are running on production devices. So definitely we used an iPhone 8, 8 Plus technically. We used a MacBook laptop, and then we also had an Android phone. If I remember correctly, it was a Huawei phone. In any case, we used these multiple devices to check, and we would. This was in an area of the world where we only had a maximum. I want to say the number was of 16 5 gigahertz channels. Maybe I'm getting that number wrong. It might have been a little bit more than 16. It might have been 19, but I think it was 19 5 gigahertz channels. Might have been a couple more, a couple less. But the point is, we had 19 channels, and we would walk around this big open office area, and we would see 25 access points all hitting a given area at a reasonable signal strength. We would see numbers that went well above the number of available channels that we had. And so we ended up disabling a good number of 5 gigahertz access point radios. There were access points when we were done that were sitting in that deployment that weren't active on either frequency, that weren't doing 2.4 or 5 gigahertz, just because of the nature of the environment and trying to solve this crowd failure problem. So, that's my guess is what was happening at this restaurant, that rather than being a ghost frame thing that we could have been able to identify with CCI, or identify a CCI issue if we wouldn't have had a ghost frame situation, rather than that, my guess was just that the power was set so low that it was causing crowd failures. That's my guess. I don't work for the restaurant, so it's hard for me to give an exact diagnosis there, but just from the outside looking in, that's what it looked like. Or it could have been a wired issue, could have been bandwidth contracts, rate limiting, whatever people call it, or could have just been overwhelmed links, ports, configuration issues on routers, switches, etc. So, there's a few different things that it could have been. Yeah. Yeah, German mentioning, changing my mind about the problem. Look, I was trying to take you all on the same journey that I was on, where I'm like, this is weird. When I turn up on my scanner, I'm expecting to see a bunch of co-channel interference, and I don't see co-channel interference. Like, why is this Wi-Fi not working well in an environment that seemingly does not have a co-channel interference problem? And my mind immediately went to, just a second. That's telling me it's, if I start coughing, that's telling me it's time to wrap this up. But my mind immediately went to, well, maybe it is a co-channel interference problem, but I'm not seeing it due to ghost frames. And I thought, okay, this is an interesting thing to talk about. And, I wanted to look at the data rates because again, ghost frames are typically going to happen if you see low retry percentages, low data rates, but you still have co-channel interference. It's, if ghost frames are the only thing causing co-channel interference, usually you won't see low rates or low retries. So everything kind of fit together, and that was the road that I went down. And then when I was preparing, believe it or not, I did do some preparation here this morning. When I was preparing this morning, I re-looked at the scan and I'm like, oh, the 3 decimal power constraint. They probably just had the transmit power set to a super low value. Probably wasn't a ghost frame issue at all. That's my guess. But yeah, let's see. Power constraint, maximum transmit power, not the transmit power. So that's the thing. So maybe the power constraint was set separately. If I'm remembering correctly with Aruba, when Aruba sets the power constraint, that is based on the number that the access point is using for its transmit power. I don't have an Aruba network in front of me where I can validate that, but that was always a reliable indicator. And if I'm remembering correctly, it was a reliable indicator of EIRP. That with Aruba, if it was 11 dBm EIRP, it would show the power constraint of 11 dBm, assuming that, what was the standard? 802.11K, I believe it was. As long as 802.11K is enabled, that you'd be able to see power constraint, and that it would show the power constraint matching whatever the EIRP was of the access point. That's my recollection there. That's my recollection. So yeah, that's it for me today. Gone way long. Normally try to keep this to an hour, maybe an hour and a half at the most. But last week I already had to stop partway through the security talk. We will get back to the last part of the security talk. And so today I really wanted to make it a point to go through the whole ghost frame thing at once. And so it caused it to go a little long. Much appreciated. Yes, thank you, Bruce. Yeah, much appreciated there. And hopefully y'all enjoyed that. And again, if you don't already, please do subscribe. Definitely appreciate those of you that subscribe. Subscribing is a great way to get notified that I'm starting up a stream. I always try to give that Twitter notification and look out for a second show. I don't know if I'll start a second show this week, but that's at least the plan, is relatively soon sort of the hopefully more structured talk on Wednesday, where there's a topic that I intend to talk about and such, and then a more loose thing on Fridays at 3 p.m. Pacific time, 6 p.m. Eastern time, where, get into more, viewer initiated topics, maybe spend a little more time fiddling around in some of the Wi-Fi tools, in the spectrum analyzer, in the scanner, in Wireshark. So that's the idea there for the twice a week streaming. Have a good one, everybody. Man, and if you're here in Los Angeles, enjoy the beautiful weather. I know that's rubbing it in for some of you in other parts of the world, but I wore a sweater because it was a little bit hot this morning. I'm gonna have to go t-shirt. It's like I think 72 degrees out here. Let's check what the actual temperature is here. Sorry. Let's get a temperature here. It is, it's only 59. So must be just in my office here. Okay, have a good one. See you all next week, or perhaps on Friday for the next Wi-Fi Streaming with Ben Miller.